My name is Ben Simmons. I have the pen name B.A. Simmons, so we put that on there just to look all official and everything. I write books and I help design games, including a game called Planet Archipelago. It's a medieval sci-fi role-play game, traditional tabletop style. And yeah, I'll let the rest of the panel introduce themselves.
I am Natasha Ence, and I am a professional game master for tabletop RPGs.
Awesome. I'm Ben Kocher. I am a reviewer at everythingboardgames.com. I also edit rule books with them and, dabble in design as well. And then once I get close to finishing one, I'll start on another. So you do what you can. I write fantasy and science fiction as well.
I'm Devon Stern. I am an amateur game designer. I've done board games for many years and recently started focusing more on video games. So I'll try to bring a little bit of video game focus to the panel as well, if for any of you are interested in Patreon for video games as well. So.
In the interest of full disclosure, I will have to admit I have not played Fortnite. I'm not much into video games.
Seriously?
I'm sorry.
I haven't either. You're good.
Okay. I was worried that I was going to be like, boo.
That's for the esports panel.
But I'm a school teacher, actually, so all of my junior high students talk about it constantly. So I feel like I have a little bit of insight into it. But anyway.
This is not a Fortnite panel.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. Well, the idea of video games. So this is Patreon for game designers, and so the idea is, how does Patreon help us in designing games? We started. My dad and I, as my business partner on this, he and I started a Patreon site last year, actually. So we're relatively new to the platform in trying to get everything out there. But how has Patreon helped you in getting games developed?
Well, with our small team, call ourselves Putty Gum, but we started a Patreon page a little while ago, like over a year ago, and I guess my main contribution to this panel is saying it's a lot harder than you think it is. But yeah, there are things you can do to make it work for you. We decided it wasn't the right time for us because we needed to focus more on creating content right now without the added burden of all the marketing and selling required for Patreon. So we'll probably come back to it at a later point. But you do have to realize, I guess, that it's not easy money. Sometimes people look at it and they think, oh yeah, I can just put my Patreon page up and people will flock to it and start giving me money. It works great. But it's a lot of work, just like any crowdfunding or any funding really takes a lot of effort. So you have not only the effort to create content, but also to then market and sell and try to get people directed to your Patreon page and signing up. So it's a big effort and undertaking. You got to kind of keep that in mind as you're looking at it as an option, that it's not going to be just set it and forget it.
Yeah. My Patreon personally is brand spanking new. I started a month ago because they put me on this panel and I wanted to start a Patreon. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to take the opportunity and do it. And so I was like, let's see, what can I do? I want to put out a encounter each month for an RPG. And so I took that opportunity and I just ran with it, and I have 4 patrons, and I'm like, yes, this is so exciting. And reiterating what he says, it's not easy, right? You have to market and you have to put out content each month or however often you're going to do it, and you can put it out. You can get paid based on each thing that you put out, or you can get paid each month. And it's kind of interesting how you have to play to that and maybe I'm not articulating this properly, but how you have to play to how you're going to Wow, my words aren't functioning this morning.
You mean, like, what
It's
is
still
it
early.
your patrons are wanting? Is that
Yeah,
you trying to place
yeah,
their
like-
desires? Or?
How you're going to, if you're going to put out something like it's a product, right? So if you're going to put out it monthly, then you have to produce something monthly. If you're going to put it out each time and you're going to get paid, wow, this is not functioning.
That's all right. I think we understand, right? I think
Right.
we're
Either it's a
getting the idea.
subscription,
Yeah.
a monthly subscription, or it's a product that you're putting out.
In either case, you have to have something there for your patrons to get
Right.
in
It's-
return for their investment.
Exactly. It's not just, hey, pay me for existing because I'm awesome.
And this is where it differs from other things like the GoFundMe, where you're basically
Right.
asking for charity.
Exactly.
And one of the seed questions for this was: is it a viable long-term source of income for game designers? And it definitely can be. I've seen examples of game designers on Patreon who are pulling in thousands of dollars a month from 1,000 or more patrons. But a lot of that is the work that they do outside of Patreon, building that audience. So if you already have an audience, obviously it's going to be a lot easier to get some of those people funding you on Patreon. But that's a big part of the work of Patreon. It's not so much setting up the Patreon page and getting the rewards just right and things, but it's building that audience and getting them to your page.
Well, and then continuing to produce.
Yeah.
Right? Or giving them something special that they can come to your Patreon and get that they won't get elsewhere.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's kind of like Kickstarter exclusive things, but happen monthly.
Exactly.
So we talk about the producing content for your patrons. What is it that we produce? My main focus, as I'm a writer, so I write, and the series of books that I'm writing is connected to the game Planet Archipelago, and I have that freedom to collaborate in that my business partner is my dad, and he and I work closely together on this in collaboration with the game, and then I write the novel series in the setting of the game, so it's in the exact same setting. He can create modules for the game, little adventures, mini adventures, for players to, they pay the $1 a month, $2 a month on Patreon, and they get exclusive content. Is the idea there? Is what we're trying to pull in, where this is not what we market to everybody else. And then I write short stories that are set in the world that offer insight to the world of Planet Archipelago that would help any players potentially say, oh, this is an option. This is a new place, in the world that can offer me these, extras. What do you guys do for your content?
So what we were originally trying was basically just doing an update on here's the progress of our game a month and releasing like an alpha version for people to test. And I've seen others that have done a similar thing. Bay 12, the makers of Dwarf Fortress, they have probably one of the most successful game design Patreon pages. They're getting more than $5,000 a month, and their big thing is just constantly updating the game. So they have updates every week or two, very frequently, and that apparently is the main thing people are wanting with them, is they just want them to continue developing that game. That's why they probably signed up in the first place, is because they enjoy that game. They want them to continue developing it, and want to support them in that and in making other games. So that's one thing you can do as far as content you're outputting is just continually updating. If it's a video game, pushing out updates for it. It could be for a board game or something like that. If it's like a living game where you're continually releasing content, coming up with new cards or other content, continually releasing those.
Yeah. So full disclosure, I don't have a Patreon, so this is awkward. But I work with a lot of people that do, because I work pretty close with a lot of game people. That's pretty sure that's a technical term for it.
Game people.
That's right.
Chill.
But one of the companies that I like a lot is Button Shy Games. They do little wallet games. I actually have a few in my bag because they're super easy to bring along. I am not getting paid to say this. Awkward. But they've on their Patreon, if you give like $1, you get a discount on their next wallet game. If you give $2, you get another discount. The further up you go, the more things you get, like a postcard from a game, or you will even get digital games, well, like print and play kind of things, or an actual wallet game. It's I think they call it club game of the month club or something, and they'll at a certain level they'll ship you a game, and that you can't do that with every board game. But the nature of Button Shy is they're so small and compact. They're 18 cards, so there's not much going on there. But they do pack a wall up and play, and so people are able to get that gameplay that they want by supporting the creator that they like. And so it's kind of a win-win for both parties, that they get a free game every month, and then the people at Button Shy get that little extra income to help them continue developing these games, because that's his full-time job now, and he's been doing it for a year or two full-time, so not very long. And it's the games, the Kickstarters, and the Patreon that keeps him going. So. And then, like with the bigger board games, that might be a little impossible. With like minis and stuff, here, have a free game this month. That's not gonna cut it unless your level is like a couple $100s, right?
Yeah.
But that's
Again,
one thing.
if you're looking at a monthly patronage, so how much a month are they paying? And if you look at it over the period of like a year, then $5 a month for 12 months, then that's a nice chunk of change that then allows you to offer something a little bit bigger to your patrons, as far as what it costs to make that and potentially ship it, depending on
if you give out like a big game
Mm-hmm.
at the end of a year rather than each month. That's a
And so-
possibility.
Can you do yearly subscription rewards?
Not the way it's set
the way
up.
it's set up, it's monthly, or by the product itself, or by what it is that you're wanting to unlock. So in Patreon, you set up your page, and you have your content that you want your patrons to get, and you set up either by the month or by how much they're giving in that one-time donation as to what they get. So you can set up, if you pay this much, you get this item, and that can be a once a year, or that can be, again, a monthly thing, where the idea is that they're drawing this directly from their bank accounts each month on an automatic system. They don't have to manually each month remember, I've got to go make my donation. And so it just makes it easier that way. So when a year has gone by, they've already essentially paid for that item that you unlocked for them when they started their patronage.
And you could so they do have that option of you get paid per creation that you put out there. Most of the successful ones I've seen have done it per month, and then they just are constantly putting out more content, more things for their fans, their patrons. And there's some nice things about that for both the creator and for the patrons. There's the consistency of knowing it's going to be the same amount each month, which is really nice for the creator to have that consistent income. It's also nice for the patron because they're not, randomly getting something withdrawn from their bank account every so often when it happens to be the month when you're putting something out. It's also nice because it typically when you do a monthly thing, you're also putting things out on a constant basis too, and so there's that consistency in your output as well, and that's really valuable for the patrons. And that's one of the things that I've noticed as well is those who are successful on Patreon typically are very consistent with their output. They're not sporadic, like they put something out one month and then not the next, and then a couple months go by and before they put something out, or they do two things in 1 month and then not the next. They're very consistent, where it might not be exactly every week or 2 weeks or month or whatever, but they're constantly putting stuff out. And that consistency is really important for patrons to know that you are producing and that this money that they're giving to you is actually going toward helping you create things. And that's the main reason they sign up in the first place, is because they like what you're creating and they want you to be able to do that. And they want to see more of it. So that consistency and showing that you are actually creating things goes a long way.
Another thing that I've personally noticed as I've done more research into how to make my Patreon work is that people will even give away their finished product for free. Their Patreon is for updates on how they're creating it, or like on the art behind it, or those sorts of things. The finished product is free, and they give that out to anyone and everyone who wants it, which is a big deal, right? Because that gets other people interested in their Patreon. So monthly, they're giving out a free product, but people are becoming their patron because they want to see those updates.
And they want the behind the scenes.
Yeah, exactly. And so that to me is fascinating because they're there to be a patron. They're there to be like that definition of a patron, to be that patron of the arts, to be there as a supporter of your creative process, more so than to buy a product from you, right? That whole spirit of the actual process of Patreon, which I think is kind of cool. So that's another way of going about it, more so than just, hey, I have a product that I'm kind of selling on this monthly subscription sort of basis, is to give the product away for free, and that actually brings in more patrons for you, which is something else that I've seen in my research.
Yeah, and something interesting with that too is that a lot of times, I think you mentioned something about kind of an exclusive, or somebody said something about exclusive content. Yeah, things like that, and getting exclusive insight into the development process as well is something that people really like. Where maybe you have kind of behind the scenes stuff of this is how our process, or this is how we made this, or getting some of that sneak peek behind the scenes stuff can be really valuable for some people. They're really interested in the creative process that you go through, and so that might be valuable for some of your patrons. I was also going to say that as far as like paying for the stuff that comes out, even things that are that you would normally have to pay for, like make a game and you sell it on Steam or something, and it's maybe $10 on Steam or something like that. There are people who will pay $2 or $3 a month on Patreon, a lot more than they would pay for the game up front, simply because they want you to make it. They want to make it possible. They want to enable that. And so it's not just about. It's interesting because there are some people who, and especially on like Kickstarter, so there are some people who they look at it as, I'm pledging $20 and I expect $20 of value in return, basically. But there are a lot of people also who, and I think it's perhaps more so on Patreon than Kickstarter, who just want to see this created, they want to see it made, and they will sign up for perhaps more, give you more money than they would normally just buying the product, because they want that they want it to be made and they want to enable that process. They want to be patrons. That's essentially what it is.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean to like mark up your value, but because there is that ability for them to even support you at whatever cost they want, right? They can pledge however much money they choose to, so you don't have to mark up your product.
And it's like Bay 12 that I mentioned earlier, they only have one reward tier. It's just $1 or more, but people will do more than $1 a month because they
really like the content.
Yeah, they love the content and they want it to continue.
And it's different than like, there's a lot of, in my industry, there's a lot of pay what you want content out there. And on those sites that do pay what you want, I think there's something of it's like a 1 to 10 ratio of people who actually pay. But when you go to like Patreon, it vastly increases. people who will actually pay for the content because just of who you're actually marketing to. So that's something.
One of our patrons on Patreon is my brother, who I don't think he's ever played a role play game in his life. If I recall, I don't think he ever actually participated. I grew up playing them. You know, my dad was creating them, but he never participated. Yet he's donating to us because he supports. And so I think on Patreon you have a number of people who simply want to see you succeed, whether because they know you personally or they like what it is you're doing. They look at the art that you're creating. And so, do you guys have any other particular ideas or things that you wanted to mention? I was going to go out on a limb here, since I'm pretending to be the moderator here.
I'll pass this around. This has my first Patreon product in it, so you can look at it and see what it is, and kind of what I'm designing, and get your own ideas from it. So I'll just do that while you ask questions.
Well, I was going to say, how many of you out there in our wonderful audience are contributing to a Patreon account and somebody's donating? Now, why is it that you are giving that monthly amount or however much you're giving for something that you already have been able to enjoy and you want to continue enjoying, or what is your motivation for contributing? Go ahead.
Well, I follow a music artist, and I donate $1 for every video that he makes, just because I appreciate the artist and the music that he makes. So.
Awesome.
To add on to that, you also feel a little bit more involved, like you're more connected to the game because you're directly giving it to the person that's creating it.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Yeah.
So, as the person receiving the patronage, how beholden are you to your patrons? Like, you go back and you look at, like, Michelangelo and those guys.
Yeah.
A lot of their stuff was commission work.
Mm-hmm.
How does this differ from commission work? Like, if your patrons start saying, we want this in your game, how much of an obligation is there to deliver on that system or product? Or
I personally don't feel any obligation to that. As a writer or as a collaborator on the game, we don't feel like that is the purpose of Patreon. If someone wants to commission something from us, they can approach us, whether it's on Patreon or they email us and say, this is what I'd like and this is what I'm willing to pay for it. Then that's separate. That's a commission piece. But I think that on Patreon as a platform, the idea is you should already have an interest or a liking of this artist. You already like that person's music, right? You have some sampling of it before you then say, yeah, I'm willing to contribute to help this person continue doing their art.
In answer to your question about, so there's it's actually a couple of different game Patreons that I support, and they do the thing where the game is actually free, but depending on your tier, you get the next update a number of weeks sooner. One of them, I'm actually at the $10 tier, so I get experimental builds and I get to help debug. And all of that stuff, that's like free labor. Actually, it's negative free labor. I'm paying to do that, but I think it's super fun because I love the game.
Yeah.
Then there's other rewards as well. A lot of Patreons have Discord, linked in, so you can be part of the community even more.
Yeah, I have that with my Patreon as well.
Yeah, creating that community, especially like an exclusive community where it's a community of people who are patrons, can be really a special feeling for those who are big fans of your work. To be able to participate in Discord with other patrons, other people who are supporting it, or be able to be involved in creating it, if that's testing out experimental builds and debugging things or giving feedback. That's a big thing with anything on Patreon as well. In fact, Patreon recommends that as one of the best ways to get patrons is to help them or allow them to become involved in creating. whether that's putting their name on the work and giving them credit for it, or allowing them to help out with experimental builds or to give feedback on early work. You can do polls as well and say like, hey, what do you think would be a good idea for this aspect of my game? Or there's a lot of different ways you can get your patrons involved, and that's something that if they love your work, they'll probably love being involved in it as well, and even do that negative free work where they're paying to work for you.
I think it's interesting when you say just to have your name mentioned or something like that, because I backed a We Shot the Moon album on Kickstarter once, a couple times actually, but I'm not somebody who gives more money than I need to for things, just because I try to keep my money to myself, because money makes my life work, and I don't have a huge amount of it. But there was a tier level where I could get my name on a poster, a We Shot the Moon poster, and the band is great, it's super fun, and so I was like, sure, why not? And now I've got a poster in a closet somewhere. But every time I look at it, it's kind of cool. But there's the fact about community is really important. I mean, first, I listen to a podcast daily, Star Wars Minute podcast. They talk about Star Wars 1 minute at a time, and it can be painful in the prequels, but it's fine. I actually like the prequels a lot. But they have a Patreon so they release Monday through Friday free episodes, free podcasts to everybody, just on iTunes and whatever. And then they have weekend editions for Patreon backers or supporters or whatever you call them. And then in the Star Wars Minute Listener Society on Facebook, people are talking about this new song that said guest released to the Patreon people, or said thing that is happening over at Patreon. And I'm like, I kind of want to join the Patreon just to be a part of this, because I listen to the podcast all the time and I participate in the Facebook group, the Listener Society, all the time. I want to be a part of that community. I haven't gone into it yet, but every time they talk about it, I have that need, that urge to put my money there so I can get some extra episodes talking about whatever new Star Wars movie came out before they're up to it, or just jabbering on about Star Wars, because that's my life,
Yeah, because you don't want to miss out on that.
Exactly, yeah, it's fear of missing out.
Mm-hmm.
I like how you mentioned the idea that everyone wants to keep their money to themselves, and if you're an artist, you would love to be able to subsist solely on your art. And I'd love it if as much as I love teaching, there is one thing that would trump teaching as far as if I could do this full time, and that would be writing. I would love to just be able to write and have that be my living. But at the same time, we understand not everybody is a rich philanthropic person who wants to just donate their wealth like Bill Gates yeah, in that sense, but the majority of people who are going to support game design on Patreon or any other art, they're going to be people who themselves aren't making tons of money probably in their day-to-day job. But everybody has, I think, that one little bit about their budget, whether it's a daily thing or a weekly, that they often refer it to the cup of coffee at Starbucks, right?
Yeah.
For the same price that you would spend on a cup of coffee at Starbucks, you could support this, right? Whether it's charity or whether it's something that is like Patreon artistic. The idea is, what is it you're willing to give up, perhaps, to be able to then support an artist or a game designer. Game designers are artists, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
very
I
much
would
so.
think so.
Do you want to do any more questions from the audience?
Yeah, do you guys have more questions?
In my line of work, I know a bunch of Patreon designers that are actually doing mods of popular games, and therefore the content that they create is add-ons for intellectual property that other people own.
Really?
I'm wondering if you have heard of any legal problems that have come from people creating free add-ons that are only supported through Patreon.
Not heard of it.
I haven't heard of any, but I have to personally be really careful about that, because
Guys making $3,000 a month.
So as soon as you have to, so as soon as you get into content that is not your own and you are charging for it, you risk someone coming after you.
No charge.
Yeah. So if you aren't charging for it, that is fine. Patreon, you are charging for it.
So you're saying that the fellow that you're talking about just now, 3,000 a month, are they actually saying for this amount monthly or for this product do you pay this much, or is it one of those
It's
pay
one
me
of those
whatever
things
you
that,
want
he gives everything that he does away for free. People give him money.
and people
See,
still just give him money?
That is fine.
That's different. Yeah.
That's different. Patreon,
Well, it's like
you are giving something and they are giving you money for that
And
something.
so he's found a nice little
Loophole?
If you
in
have-
the
yeah.
system there that he's exploiting, which is interesting to
So
consider.
if you look at my content, you'll see in the back I have the OGL license, right? I cannot say what system I made that content for, other than that I have worked with SRD5 and that I use the Open Gaming license.
Fine line.
Yes. Because if I cross that line, I open myself up to legal issues because I'm charging for that content.
Yeah.
But if I go the free route and say, hey, I'm giving away this content for free, and what I'm charging for is the updates on art or how my process is going, that's different.
Have you heard of anybody getting into legal trouble?
I have not personally.
Say if they found that loophole and they're exploiting it, then they at least they feel, whether they actually end up getting in trouble for it or not, they feel that they're safe enough from any of that. There are issues with Patreon, but not. I've never heard of anything like that as far as.
But again, as soon as a big company gets a hold of that and they decide to press charges and it takes it to court and then they set precedent and all that stuff, right? That opens up all sorts of things. So it's better to stay on the safe side than it is to muck around.
So this is where I am privileged enough and I can write based on something that my father is originated and created, and I've worked with him for several years now on that content, and there's no problem in that. He's a nice enough guy. He's not going to sit there and say, well, you're writing books and making money off of what was originally my idea, and therefore you owe me. In that sense, if I were to suddenly try to write a Star Wars book or a Star Trek book, which are popular, and for that fan base, I would get into all sorts of trouble if I wrote one, published it myself, got it out there somehow without their okay. Yeah. Even if I created original characters, but it's set in their world, their universe.
And even if you gave it out completely for free.
If I gave it for free, then it's not. It's that would make it fan art in a sense,
Fan content.
And so it would, that would be different. And that's the loophole, right? If I give it for free and just say, hey, I have no problem with you guys donating.
Well, and
for
that
this.
depends on the company too.
It does.
And
If
there,
it's anything Star Wars, because Disney now owns Star Wars, you're in trouble because Disney will come after you.
well, and you have to add a disclaimer too. So Wizards of the Coast, they have a fan content creation disclaimer that if you create fan content, you have to include that, which some people know and some people don't. But for me, as a professional, if I create that stuff, it's important that I include that. So even on my website, under my accreditation or my, that stuff, on the bottom of my page, you'll see a little link to get to, all that stuff. On there, there's the fan content stuff that has that little thing so that I can use all of that. Yes.
Do you guys find in the Patrons you've done or that you've seen that it's worthwhile to invest in startup, like having really good videos talking about what you're going to do, like get professional video recording for that, or have like really great images, you know what I mean, like really heavily marketing it and investing in
From what I've seen in going through it, and this was, I say, months and months ago when I was first looking into starting a Patreon page for our business. The artists that tend to do better are somebody who has something audio or visual directly with it, whether it's video, whether it's still photography or art designed like that, or a lot of podcasts. There's tons of podcasts that get their contributions through Patreon, and that's apparently they're doing really well with that platform, and that's part of it. We live in a very visual audio world these days, especially social media has made us, I don't want to say enslaved to that, I don't want to get political with social media. Anyway, I'm a junior high school teacher. We were like, social media is bad. Pay attention to this lesson I'm giving you. It's boring you to death. Right? But that's the thing, is that they tend to do better. So yes, if you are wanting to create a Patreon site for a game that you're developing, make it as visual as you can. Put something audio with it. I've considered. I have a friend who's a raconteur. He's a professional storyteller. Has a recording studio in his basement, and having him do audio of the stories that I write. So it's not just that you read the story, but a lot of people love Audible these days. It's there's a reason that audiobooks are huge. So they'd rather probably pay and listen to somebody read the story to them rather than get the download that they have to then read it off the screen themselves.
Yeah. In regards to video and other visual content for that, as far as Kickstarters go, we've done a lot with Everything Board Games. We've looked at a lot of Kickstarters, seen what worked for them, looked what didn't work. Kind of after the fact, like, okay, what's different about this one that succeeded beyond reason versus this one similar in nature that kind of failed? And a lot of it was images, videos. Like if they didn't have an intro video to the Kickstarter, there was a way bigger chance that they weren't going to fund or anything. If they didn't have images of the actual game, and that's a big deal because you're using Kickstarter to fund your game.
Yeah.
But if you don't have pictures and images of the actual game, people are going to think it's a scam, and that happens sometimes. That people will put like these 3D rendered images on Kickstarter and be like, "Look at our awesome game. There's going to be minis galore for only $100," and people will give it, and then they cancel on the last day because they were finally caught. That was like a couple months ago. But yeah, if there is a video, if there are good images, mind you, not blurry ones or ones that aren't of the actual product, then you need those things to gain the trust of your audience, for one thing, and to show that you can put forth some at least decent production value. And so I believe the same thing would go with Patreon as well.
Yeah, and you don't have to go like crazy overboard with putting really nice images all over the page and like professional quality production of videos and things like that. It can just be like videos you take on your phone of like just talking about the game, and just little images here and there in the text or something, like little headings or stuff like that are just kind of tailored to your game. But it's basically showing that you care enough to put an effort forth to do this Patreon page, and that you actually are producing content. That's an example of your content when you show those images, even if it's not necessarily images that are in the game per se, but they're images in the style of the game or something like that, or that you're willing to create this video and talk to people about it. It shows that you are putting forth the effort, and that goes a long way with the people who are looking at your page and evaluating whether or not they should sign up as a patron. I mean, think about if you've got one page you look at that is just like plain text and like all they have is like a banner image and there's nothing else they're really stylized or styled to their game, and then you have another one that has images and videos and things, you're going to be more inclined to support the one that looks like they've put more effort into it and looks like they actually are producing something.
Yeah, just one last thing on that, like Devon was saying, you want to show that you're invested in it, because if you have this blank page with like give me money and nothing to show for it, it just looks like you just want to take their money and you don't want to give things back. And you kind of have to show that, you're invested in this and you're willing to give with them. But you're giving something different than what they're giving. And I had somewhere else I was going with that, but I completely forgot it, so we will forego that.
Did you have more that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, what are the main differences between Kickstarter and Patreon as far as from a creator's perspective? When do you know that I should kickstart this project versus maybe I should try and do a Patreon for all of my projects?
Patreon is for small things. Kickstarter is for big things.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yep.
If you have a single project that you can separate out from any other particular projects, not necessarily not related at all, but it's a separate thing, and that tends to be something that you want to then have Kickstarter perhaps, or ask for the donations that way, with the idea that by donating to that, the project will be completed and there you go.
Mm-hmm.
With Patreon, it should be a more continuous thing. Like you're paying month to month for potentially years. You want to have a series of products that come out, not just one big project and then it's done.
And that's why it's interesting to see what game designers have been successful with Patreon, because games are typically something that are bigger, longer term projects, and that's where they still output something. They give something to their community of patrons each month, whether that's updates to the game or there's an interesting one called the Sock Pop Collective, SOKPOP, and somewhere in Scandinavia that it's this group of 4 guys that their way of doing Patreon is they release 2 games each month, like little things you would make in like a game jam. They release 2 of them each month that their patrons can have, and then they use the money from Patreon to help fund some of their longer term projects as well. And so the patrons are signing up not only for their getting these little games each month, which helps with showing that they are invested in they're actually producing something, but they're also signing up for the longer term projects which they want them to be able to do. But whatever it is, whatever model you go with on Patreon, you have to be putting something out each month or on a very consistent basis. So you can work with longer term projects, but you still have to have monthly output.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any other questions from anybody? We have just a couple minutes left to make sure you guys are satisfied with however much information we can give you.
Got a couple other thoughts if you don't have any questions.
If there aren't any questions, go for it.
So just in some research I was doing with this, that consistent output again is really important. Also consistent communication.
Mm-hmm.
Like always say, posting even if you're not, it's not necessarily something you've produced that you want to show, but like continually giving updates and communicating with your community goes a long way. Also just marketing everywhere. Like, and this is just good general digital marketing advice, is just go wherever you can find the fans. If they're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, wherever they are,
I'm not
you got something
quite
to
sure
post
how to
it
use
everywhere.
Snapchat yet as marketing. I'm trying to figure.
But people do, so it's possible.
My kids have Snapchat, but I have yet to figure out how that could be useful in that sense. I'm not.
So yeah, find every channel you
Not
can
that
to
young.
reach them and reach out on every channel that
Yeah.
you can. And have the Patreon has a little button that you can put on your site and other places.
Mm-hmm.
Put that everywhere too, and it'll take them to your Patreon page. Make it as easy as possible for people who want to fund you to go and fund you.
It's the first thing that you'll see if you visit my website, basimmonsauthor.com. It'll say if you like what we're doing here, donate to or become a patron. Not donate, become a patron, and then it goes on to my books and other things that I do.
Yeah, we did some really small games. We've done like a couple 30-day long projects where we just had a really small scope and made a complete game in that time. But one of them we actually, and kind of the credits are when you finish the game, just have the button to Patreon there. So if you like this, you can go and fund us.
Mm-hmm.
So you can put it everywhere you can, basically.
Yeah.
I got Natasha's card. Do any of you have other cards that I could say?
Yeah,
I do,
we
yeah.
find everybody. You have business cards with you?
I have a card with me, yeah.
I
Devon?
should have thought of that, but
Is it-
I don't know. But
Yeah.
but you can check out what we've done on puttygum.itch.io. PUDDYGUM.
We've got a table in the vendor room. big banner. It says Planet Archipelago. So it comes with this. I've got my personal business card as a writer. My dad has his for the game designer and artist. And so, depending on what you're interested in, if you're interested in the game, go with his card. He'll have all the information more on the game. I kind of focused on the writing side of it. So, if you're interested in the novels, then you can look at that too.
Alright, thank you. That's just
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Hey.